Welcome to Student Leadership Labs. I'm here with a wonderful group of youth workers and at least one pastor from South Carolina. And we're going to have a conversation today about what it looks like to restart or relaunch our youth ministries post-COVID-19. In the midst of this, I want to make sure we all know and realize that, that we're all going to be at different points, at different places in this. And that's okay. And there are plenty of resources that have already been put out and will continue to be put out over the coming weeks and months as youth workers and churches and states and everything else begins to reopen. But we want to have some conversation today because I've been asked by a number of people throughout the last couple of weeks, particularly here in South Carolina. As you all know, I guess a week and a half ago or so, Bishop Holston released a statement that they were going to lift restrictions on in-person worship for churches in South Carolina beginning on June 14th. And so as you might imagine, that immediately began a swell of questions of what does that mean for you, X, Y, Z, whatever ministries happening at the church, including youth ministries. So today we're going to have a little bit of conversation about that. I want to share a little information and then with everyone and then take some questions. And I want you all to hear from these wonderful folks that are here with me. I'm going to share this screen if I can right quick. Can you guys see that now? Wait, not yet. Now can you see it? That restarting youth ministry post-COVID? Good. Excellent. So here's what I want to share with you about this is a few things. As I've thought through this, like I said, it's a topic that is ever changing. Before we got into really some nuts and bolts of sort of a process to think through as you're considering reopening, I was reminded of there we go. The guiding principle you may be familiar with, which is John Wesley's 3 simple rules. Because I think these 3 simple rules can help guide us as we're thinking about, as on a big picture level at least, can guide us in our thoughts about what it looks like to restart youth ministry. And they are simply, 1, do no harm. I think that's one of probably the easiest one to think about here is, as we're thinking about opening and restarting youth ministry, there's clearly a lot of questions about how is coronavirus, how is it, what's what I'm looking for, transferred from person to person, and is there harm done by meeting together? As far as I know, our governor still has, at this point on June 1st, still has a limit of groups of no more than 10 people. So are we doing harm by coming together? And what I think that does, it makes us think through, as we're thinking about doing no harm, it forces us to think through what practices can I put into place to try to eliminate the opportunity I would do harm, obviously inadvertently. Nobody wants to hurt anyone, harm anyone, but am I doing everything I can to avoid the spread of COVID-19 in my meeting once I start? So this idea of how do we do no harm, I think is something to always keep in the back of our mind. And the second thing is do good. And you know, it's interesting here. I've talked to a youth worker probably, 3 weeks ago, and they were like, my youth are they're really want to get together. They're done. You've probably all experienced this. They're done with Zoom. Those conversations and the video chats they're really cool, particularly in the very beginning. And they quickly became stale, and now they're just done with them. And so it probably would do some good for us to be, as youth ministries, as youth particularly, for them to be face-to-face together in the same room, or at least in the same parking lot, or whatever it might look like. But then lastly, this idea of staying in love with God, I think that's where we have to remember that's our most important thing. And as youth workers, above all else, above all the fun we get to have and the things we get to do with young people, ultimately it's about how do we help young people stay in love with God. And that begins, in my mind, first and foremost with us staying in love with God. And so I think we can begin to think through, are there new ways of connecting with young people and connecting ourselves to God that maybe we have forgot about. And so I just thought that laid a pretty good foundation today as a place to start of this idea of do no harm, do good, and stay in love with God. And the other thing I want to really share with you is just really this informal process for restarting. And so it's basically a 6 or 7, I've forgotten now. I think it's 7 steps. It's 6 or 7, it's 6 steps. Sorry, I couldn't remember how many steps my plan was. 6 just really big picture steps for you to take as you begin to restart. And the reason it's big picture is this. Every congregation that is represented here and every congregation that watches this video later on, you are unique. Every church has what I call a church DNA. Just like you and I as people, we each have a DNA that is unlike any other person on this earth, which is one of the most incredible things about God and his creation. Each church as well, each church is going to be unique in itself. And so that's why I didn't really get too detailed, because I want to give you the ability to think through, and you'll see some of these steps that you having the ability to think through how this applies to your church context is going to be critical. So what does that process look like? The first thing I would say is this: is create a team. Don't try to make the decision on your own. If you currently have a youth council, whether that's young people and adults, parents, whoever's on that youth council, if you currently have some kind of leadership team for young people, for youth ministries, utilize them, give them some input. I think that you want to share that, because you want to share that responsibility, because then it becomes a we, not me. And if you make a decision that ends up not being the perfect decision, which that's probably fine, is going to happen, then it's something you've done together and you've shared. It doesn't, because if you make that decision on your own and it backfires, what happens? People always say, well, that youth worker made a bad decision, and it becomes all about what you did. And then if you do it with the group, there's some buy-in from other people. The other thing, quite honestly, truthfully, is that I think every youth worker is better when they're part of a team. And so I think you'll make better decisions if you've had opportunities, even if you're an introvert. I'm not an introvert. I'm an extrovert. I tend to process in a group, and I process out loud, and I'll talk things through people all the time. My family sometimes gets annoyed by it. But even if you're an introvert, being able to talk about and process all these questions together, I think will ultimately give you a better response and a better action as you begin to restart. Secondly is assess your needs. What is it that needs to happen? One of the things I think is great about this time of quarantine has been that it's really helped us in ministry really be laser focused on what's most important. And so if you have already gotten to the point in your youth ministry where you have a clear purpose and a clear idea of this is who we are and this is what we're trying to accomplish, then again, to begin to assess what needs to happen in order for me to accomplish that purpose really well. Now, this is where it gets back to, as you're assessing your needs. I wrote an article a couple of weeks ago for the Youth Worker Collective, and the opening line of the article ended up being, no youth worker put PPE in their budget for this year. But the reality is that if you're going to restart your youth ministry, chances are you're going to need to think about, do we need to be wearing masks while we're meeting? And if we do, I need to assess how many do I need to have, and do I have enough, and do I have enough space if we're going to gather and need to stay 6 feet apart in order to have enough distance between us. Then I need to assess, is my room large enough? Because if I've got a 12 by 12 room where we meet and I've got 20 people in there, there's no way we can physically get 6 feet apart. So I need to think through, how do I meet either in a bigger space or outside, or how do I break our group up into smaller segments that can gather in that space safely? So assess what your needs are, write your plan, put it in writing. Whatever you decide to do, put it in writing and get some feedback on it, which gets back to this next part about get buy-in from your leadership. whether that's a youth council, a church council, a trustees, a pastor, a SPRC committee, any or all of those people, or your parents or whoever it is, get feedback and buy-in from leadership. Now, you don't want to put it out to the whole church and ask the whole church to give you their opinion, because they're all going to have an opinion, and it's going to be, you're going to have some folks who are going to love it, you're going to have some folks who are going to hate it, and you don't want to change based on those things. But you want to make sure, particularly with your leadership, if you are on a church staff, whether you're on a church staff or not, at a minimum, make sure that your pastor, and I would say that even if Randy wasn't here, by the way, as the resident pastor, make sure your pastor, if you have a Christian education director that works at the church, or whoever your supervisor is, so to speak, even if you volunteer, you report to someone, maybe it's a work area education or whatever, share, once you've got it written, share it with them, get some feedback and ways to tweak it, and get buy-in from leadership. They're going to be behind you, and you're going to have, and you want that buy-in. So one, you have support, should folks, because there are going to be people who are not going to agree with it, no matter what you decide to do. So you got support, but also you want to make sure that it's an integral part of a larger restart plan at your church, hopefully. Fifth is over-communicate your plan. If you think you've communicated enough, communicate it some more. I think communication is one of the toughest things in ministry nowadays. So I've been in ministry now for 24 years, which is bizarro world to me, but it's reality. And communication has drastically changed in those 24 years. It used to be that if I did emails and I'd got some information to my secretary to put in a newsletter and bulletin, and I could use phone calls, I communicated well. I still, matter of fact, I remember there's somewhere, I've still got some of the old stuff that I used to do for calendars and that kind of thing. And then when I say it was clip art, it was literally running it off, cut it out, paste it onto a thing, and then run the copy again. I mean, I was old school. So then it got into, you had to do the newsletters, and I was doing websites, and then it was texting, and then it was social media. And so the problem now is there's so many levels you have to communicate on. So try to think through all those ways that you communicate with not just your youth, but with the parents particularly, as you begin this thing. The reality is this: the communication needs to go to parents, because the parents, young people still have, typically, I won't say always, typically young people have this 10 foot tall and bulletproof mentality that this is never going to happen to them. Moms and dads are a lot more concerned. I'm a dad of three daughters, two that are teenagers, one's now 20. So I get that. And so if I can communicate to the parents where they feel safe, then there's a chance that a better chance that the young people can be involved. I want to take time to say this too. Don't expect when you restart, don't expect your attendance to be what it was before you stopped. Because there are going to be people in your congregation, parents in your congregation particularly, and possibly kids, young people who just don't want to risk it. And that's perfectly okay. And so I said to say, don't you get discouraged about low attendance, but also continue to think through how you can connect and engage with those young people who are a part of your ministry who aren't physically there, or that's still offering online options, those kind of things, whatever it is. So that's a little tangent. Over communicate your plan, and then finally implement your plan. Now, the old adage of plan the work, work the plan. This is what this is. Those first 5 steps are plan the work, and then finally you work the plan. If I was going to add a 7th step, I would say always, almost in this situation, constantly evaluate your plan, because things are changing almost daily, it feels like. And what's smart one day is not smart the next day. So that's kind of my real quick, I hope that was quick enough, 15-minute spiel about, I need to stop sharing. This is what I need to do here. Oh boy, this is where I struggle with. There we go. I just did it. All right, we're back. So I just want to share that information with you, just kind of get it all out and dump it out. And then I want to have some conversation with you all about specific questions that you have in the midst of this, or if there's a specific question around the process and the 3 rules or whatever. So what questions or what questions or comments do you want to share with the group? Don't be shy. Don't make me edit this part out of our video because I have to wait until somebody asks the first questions, like we're in a room with kids, with junior hires. Okay, it looks like Drake's got a question. Drake, you can unmute and go for it.
All right. I'm Drake Moyd. I'm from St. Matthew, UMC. My question would be when, I guess it's just a simple question, but when should we be planning to restart?
That's a good question. And so I'm going to say this, hoping that it doesn't again sound like a broken record, but it's going to be different from every church. And so I know that there are some churches that are planning, the restrictions are being lifted on June the 14th to allow for in-person worship to take place in South Carolina, according to Bishop Holston. But I also know there are churches that are not opening on June 14th. They're not going to begin worshiping on June 14th. I would tend to think, first and foremost, that if your church is not going to begin, I would think worship would be the first thing that should start back in your church. I think it would be a little odd to begin to hold meetings, before worship started back. And maybe that's just me. And if anybody has if you have a pushback against this and say, Chris, you're an idiot, I've been called worse and I can take it, because the reality is it's going to be different for lots of folks. But I think for me, I would want to wait until worship began at a minimum at my church before I started that. Once worship begins, I would also think we have to honor the authorities of our state and our cities and our counties and those kind of things as well. And so I think if there's still an ordinance in place that says we should not gather, because of safety reasons, shouldn't gather with more than 10 people, and your youth group meeting is going to be 15 or 20, it may be time to wait until some of those restrictions are lifted. Beyond that, as far as I'm concerned, the question then becomes, as soon as I can put into place as many precautions, safety-wise, as I and my leadership feel comfortable with. And so, if we decide as leadership team that for us to meet again, we need to require people to wear masks, and because of that, we need to make sure we've got some masks on hand. And I can't get masks for another month. Well, I need to wait another month until I can do what I said I was going to do. And so a lot of that's going to become situational, but I think it's writing that plan in a perfect world and thinking through those questions for your church and your congregation of what needs to happen before I'm ready to begin meeting with my youth in my youth ministry. And once those criteria are met, then it's time. That's what Randy, you got your hand up. What thought do you have? Do you have some add there or another question?
I was just going to say St. Matthew's going to start back in-person worship on the 14th. It's, we've worked very hard to develop all kind of rules about how we're going to do it, but we also are aware it's an experiment.
Yep.
And so we're going to test and test and test, and we think it's going to take a month before we really get it right. But I was going to say that, we could invite youth to come back to these worship services, and at least they would be together at the same time, maybe not in the same way that they would prefer, but they could be invited to come back to worship when worship restarts. And then when we learn enough from that experiment, we can say, now you can translate this into a youth setting, with the needed adjustments, that kind of thing.
Yep. I do think, thank you for that, Randy. I think that's good wisdom. I do think as well, Drake, it's one thing as well, depending on, part of this again gets back to your context, because you know your group. If you've got a group of mainly senior high kids who get it, who have that level of maturity, whatever maturity senior high youth have. They're more mature than junior highs. There's a better chance that a group of mainly senior highs could understand and follow rules of social distancing than junior high students. So I mean, that's the thing. And so like, I think children's ministry should be slower than youth ministry. And I think nursery should be even after that, because keeping these, they just don't, in those age levels where they don't understand why I can't, for a toddler or a 3 or 4 year old, which I guess is a toddler, they can't understand why I can't go I can't go take my teething ring and put it in my friend's mouth anymore. Well, so we got to think through, how can we help in those areas? I do think we're going to need to think through, and I put this in the article, we're going to need to think through how we do youth ministry, because, I mean, you think about like snack suppers. If you have a snack supper, that's part of your youth ministry gathering. Well, most of the times that means we're walking through a feeding line, almost said feeding trough, and we're all using the same utensils to slap our corn or whatever we're serving onto the plate. Well, that's going to be another opportunity to transmit a possible disease. So, we got to think through snack supper. Maybe it means we don't do snack supper for a while. Some of the games we play in youth ministry. I jokingly in the article wrote, can you imagine Chubby Bunny, in a post-COVID world? But these things we do with food create our mouth, and then it just emotes this explosion of nastiness or whatever. It's, it creates these things that we've never had to think about before. And so I think another thing Randy said, I think I want to mention is, it is in some ways, there is no formula, because nobody's ever done this before. There's never been we don't have any experience to draw upon. So it's using our best guess. And I'll say this, I do want to say this on the flip side. I have compared it some to safe sanctuaries in the past, in that no matter how great our safe sanctuaries policies are, we can never fully eliminate any risk that a predator is going to get through all of our safeguards and prey upon someone in our youth ministry. Our hope with safe sanctuaries policies is that we create we make it as difficult as possible, but there's never a guarantee. And so I think the same thing happens here. There's never a guarantee that if we host a worship service or a youth ministry gathering, that we can eliminate all risk. We want to reduce or eliminate as much as possible leading up to it. What other questions do you have? Anybody else got a burning question about the process, or just where you are now in this whole reopening or restarting conversation? Go ahead, Amy. Or Rebecca, whoever's got it.
I just wanted to know more for the youth workers here, is who is still planning on, or has thought about planning camps or trips over the summer, and if so, what precautions have you thought about taking?
All right. Anybody got plans for summer camp trips in the summer? Anything for the summer? That's a good question. I'm guessing that means nobody. Go ahead, Drake.
We have looked into a rafting trip with Carrie, but in terms of precautions, we really don't know where we stand in terms of if we can do that or not. I know that the whitewater rafting companies have opened back up, but we don't know if we're allowed to truly. So I know we have a couple senior highs that are like seniors that are graduating, and we were hoping to get them involved one last time before they go off to college, but we really don't know what we're allowed to do. So that's kind of a moot point at this point. And in my opinion, I really don't know what to, we haven't discussed any precautions or anything with it, because I don't know if we're allowed to even go that route.
Ryan, go ahead.
We've been having some conversations along those same lines as well, about doing something outside, whether it's rafting or going canoeing. One of the concerns that we have, and we were hoping to get some feedback on it from this, is transportation. I know Boy Scouts are prohibiting carpooling, for example. So what are thoughts and feedback about, I mean, if we were to take kids 2 hours up to Asheville to go rafting, that's 4 hours round trip. We're asking parents to drop a kid off. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't even thought about that until you said that. I mean, and even more so than 4 hours, it's 4 hours in I'm imagining a church van, church bus, which is
Right.
it's tighter quarters. Unless you rent a charter bus for 15 people, you can't really sit every other, sitting every other row. And so I think those are the things. That's is a great example of things that we've got to shift our mentality of how do we do those kind of things. And I can't, as a parent. I'm trying to think this as before I told you I process out loud. So the problem with that is sometimes I process and don't think things before I say them, and then I can't take them back, especially when I'm being recorded. But if my first initial thing is, as a parent, I think I would have a tough time thinking about wanting to put my kids on a van with 10, 12 other kids on a church van or a church bus. It's a 15 passenger bus in close quarters like that, for 2 hours one way, 2 hours back. And so that would make me hesitant, I think. And so I think that so I would say again, if that's something that you feel is going to be a possibility, then it's going to require thinking differently about, are there alternative transportation means? Is it, depending on where you're going to and from, if it's a 2 hour drive, it's probably not going to have a lot of parents who are willing to drive their kids up 2 hours and wait on them to wrap for 3 hours and drive them back individually. So that'd be one option, to say, you're going to have to, kind of arrange your own transportation instead of expecting us to provide the transportation to get there. I mean, I want to come up with a predefined plan of, I'm going to take whatever that number is of having, did you feel like you reduce the numbers in each van or bus, and think about those kind of things. I think that I would say all of those things. I mean, I don't know if I have a perfect answer to say yes. Yes, it's okay, or no, it's not okay. I think that, again, I've got to think through all the possibilities and help and try to eliminate as much risk as possible and communicate all the steps I'm taking for transportation to the parents. And then ultimately it's going to be up to the parents and or the youth to decide, do I feel comfortable enough with the action taken that I feel comfortable enough to allow my young person to go, or I want to go. Samantha, you got something? Or Drake? Sorry, I forgot y'all together. Oh, you don't ask
In
questions.
terms of like close quarters and rafting, I mean, are they not, you like you said, you're going to be on the river for 3 hours, or they're going to be sitting way closer in a raft than they would in a bus.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah.
So is rafting just off the table altogether? I mean, is that kind of?
I mean, here's the thing. Truthfully I can't tell you. I mean, for me to say it's off the table or on the table has zero authority. I mean, I just don't have the authority to say, I hereby bestow upon you the opportunity to go rafting this summer, or I hereby say you cannot go rafting this summer and you have to listen to me. Ultimately, it's a local church decision. I mean, even with the, like I said earlier, even with the reopening of worship services, it's still a local church decision. The restrictions, the recommended, the recommended, restriction was to not have worship services. But there were churches in South Carolina I know of that were still having worship services in some form or fashion. And so it's really, now that they're being restricted, we've been very careful. The conference has been very careful to say, once the 14th gets here, it doesn't mean we're not mandating that you have to begin to worship. We're saying that, we now feel like it's okay to be considering this. And I know the church I attend has already said they're not going to open up they haven't really set a date yet, but they're not going to begin on the 14th. I know at least 2 or 3 other churches that have said similar things. So you know, it ultimately comes through, again, I would say you want to, don't, as a youth worker particularly, when there's this typical default idea that youth workers are the wild and crazy people who run rogue and do their own, you know, kind of go to the beat of their own drum. I would suggest that you're having a conversation with your leadership, particularly your pastors, and that you're having this conversation with other people in leadership at your church. Becca or Amy, somebody's got something to say. Go for it. I like how Amy always points to Becca.
Always. There's that. You kind of answered it, but by saying that, you know, it's all individual plans. But again, I just kind of curious about y'all's feedback, as this is what y'all are living to, is, you know, we thought about 2-week quarantine before going on or doing something, like something specifically for the seniors or whatever. What, I know I'm trying to find an answer, but this is just something, it hurts to say no 100% when there are other things that are happening, you know? I don't know. It's hard to make a decision.
Has anybody, and I'm kind of paraphrasing your question, Becca, I hope that's okay. Does anybody have at this point any definitive plan already, it's, I guess, at least close to being in place? Anybody have? No? Okay, good. I mean, not good. Okay. I kind of thought that was the case. It's the front end, and I don't expect, my hunch is there'll be very few youth ministries that do much of anything between in June and July. I don't, again, I don't think it's necessarily wrong to, if you do something in June or July. I'm not saying that, but I just don't think it's going to happen. I think there's just still too much unknown, and there's just still too much, there's still a little too much fear for folks to be super comfortable with most of what happens in youth ministry. I think particularly activities, I think that what you may see happen sooner would be, you know, smaller gatherings of you know, small groups, that kind of stuff, having discussion. But the activities, because of the transportation piece and the overnight stuff, and the other thing with camps too. And so we I know Asbury Hills has called off, you know, has canceled all their camps for the. I don't know what that means for their stuff in the fall. I do know there's at least one camp in South Carolina that does youth camp stuff that is still going on. But like most of the camps that are on college campuses and those sort of things have been canceled, to my knowledge, or at least pushed back. And we made the decision. Immerse is our summer, you know, SCMYP's little summer. We do, well, this year we're planning to do one in the summer at the end of in August, first weekend of August, and then another one in the mountains in the fall. It's a discipleship event weekend, a 4-day deal. And we decided to cancel it because we were setting it up kind of like Revolution this year, where you would pay a program fee and come to the programming at one of our churches down at the beach, but you got your own housing and your own meals. And so our thing was we felt more like we should not have that because of that fact than if we had been in Asbury Hills, we had a little more of a controlled environment. Because once you go to your hotel or where you're going out to eat or wherever you're staying, then we don't really know there's no telling what maybe contracted and brought back. So that's another part of it too, is as you're thinking through these things. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Yes, Randy.
I was just thinking, Chris, that the more outdoor open air, the better.
Yeah.
I'm no scientist or epidemiologist, but I have to think that if there's air moving and you've got a reasonable amount of distance between people, and they're not doing, you know, things that are drawing their bodies way close together, that's going to be a safer environment than almost any indoor environment, short of maybe a gym.
Yep. And matter of fact, that youth where I was talking about, I talked to 3 weeks ago. That was what one of the things I suggested to her was she was on the coast. And so I said to her, if you want to do something, you could, you know, have a parking lot meeting and just make sure they bring their own chairs and set up 6 feet from each other. Now, depending on where your parking lot is and how many people you have, how big that circle is, it may be hard to talk. but because that's what she was saying, they're starving for connection, and I get that. Like I said, my daughters are starving for connection too, and trying to walk that balance. Samantha, did you and Drake have something else? I thought I saw your hand. That's gone. If you lowered at school.
Sorry, I guess I'm full of questions. Do you think that we could? Do you think starting up in August is an insane idea? Like when school starts back up, or is that something that is feasible at this point? Or
I don't think it's insane. I think I would keep an eye on how your local school, what your local schools decide. And that's one of the things we used to always do when I was in local church youth ministry was if school was canceled, we didn't meet, for snow or whatever, And so I think that's a good indicator to see how I think we can learn from our, from the schools and see, what we're hearing from them, how they are, if they're planning to go back, on a normal schedule, normal school day, then I think that tells us there's at least some comfort level with it being okay at this time. Now, I do want to say this too. I think, as we said earlier, because it is a learning curve and nobody's ever done this before, that we've got to be okay if we and how things change so quickly, that if we make a plan and we start a plan and we see this not working well, we've got to be okay with changing our plan again on the fly and backing up and maybe pausing again. Again, that's it may feel like it's an embarrassment and a bad planning on the front end, but things just change so drastically, so rapidly. So I don't think it's insane to think you could meet, normally. I think meet on a regular schedule in August. I don't think, I do think it's the idea of meeting the way we've always met, just kind of this free, no worries, there's no risk thing. I think that's a thing of the past, I think, really. But I think as far as getting back to some kind of a regular schedule by August, I don't think it's insane, but I would pay attention to the schools. If we see schools that are taking drastic measures, like, I've heard some places talking about doing like an A-B day where half the kids go on Monday and Wednesday, the other half go on Tuesday and Thursday, and everybody does, e-learning on Friday. That would say to me there's still some risk. And so we need to be very careful with how we proceed. Paige, go ahead.
This sort of goes back to our earlier conversation, but I just wanted to say, if you're thinking through like summer gatherings and what those might look like, I know the American Camp Association has some guidelines, and those might be helpful in kind of thinking through some of the best practices for getting together or what that might look like.
Yeah, they do. Matter of fact, if you'll give me a second, as you were talking about that, I can put another resource up that is kind of it may be the same one you're talking about, and I think is the camp stuff as well. I'm really sorry. I should have had this up already. Give me a second. I'm trying to find it. This is kind of embarrassing. It's on Facebook in a Facebook group I'm on. Here we go. I'm going to share this with you here shortly, I promise. Yeah, so here, this is I'm going to put this in the chat. If I can get back to the chat. So this I'll share it. There it is in the chat, and I'll also share my screen to show you what it is. Well, let me get back up first. Share screen. Yeah. So this is the CDC put it out. It's kind of a decision tree for camps, and so basically it says, should you consider opening? And there's 3 questions. If you can answer all of those, yes, you go then to this section and say, are recommended health and safety actions in place? There's a list there. If yes to all, is ongoing monitoring in place? If yes to all, then it says open. So, I show that just to give you an example of the kind of thing that you might find. So that's cdc.gov/coronavirus. if you say no to any of these, don't open. If you say no to any of these, you got to meet the safeguards first. If you say no to any of these, you got to meet the safeguards first, and then so it kind of gives you this checklist. Now, some of those won't apply because it's camps, not youth group meetings, but I think it's a pretty good resource to help. I will when we record this and put it out, I've got a few other resources like that might be helpful. I'm hoping to get this thing out by the end of the week on our website, and then I'll send it out via email and social media. I'll add some other information from CDC and DHEC or whoever all, and anything I've got, maybe resources. I do want to mention too, I would for you that another thing to keep your eye on is the conference website, umcsc.org. There's a whole page now. So I was part of writing a resource for local churches called Reset, Restart, Renew. There's really more about starting back with worship services, but we're continuing to update that website with more and more information about as it comes out. So those resources are being changed again on a pretty regular basis with updated stuff. And so as I find things that are youth ministry specific that are helpful, there's a committee of folks that are looking at things to add to that website as resources. I'll continue to add those resources as well. I'll also put them on SCMYP.org as well. Any other thoughts, questions? Oh, Amy and Becca, somebody's got one. I saw that hand.
I don't know. I don't know if it's.
I feel like the evangelist. I see that hand. Do I see another?
Yes.
My Baptist root coming out. Sorry.
Oh, she's Baptist.
I got that.
So this might be a different topic for a different thing, but if we are, feels kind of grim, I guess. The likelihood of things happening anytime soon. So when they do start to happen and we're socially distanced, a topic that I think we'd like to consider is what does that look like? What kind of interactions do you have in those small group things? Because, one of the best things about youth group is youth interacting with each other. And it's almost felt like during this whole quarantine, they're all looking at us. They're looking at us to provide the entertainment and they're not interacting with each other. And I'm interested in finding out what ways we can have them interacting with us, if that makes sense.
So to make sure I'm clear, you're talking about ways for youth to interact with adults, with the leaders. Is that what I'm hearing?
Or just in general. I mean, it's because what it seems like what it becomes is we've had one parking lot thing and it's everybody's sitting in a circle, and because they're socially distanced, they're all looking at Amy and Becca to hear what we're saying, and it's all about.
Yeah. So I would say off the cuff is thinking of beforehand. I think of some really good questions, open-ended questions, and starting them off really light even, and just saying, hey, turn to your neighbor, or turn, look towards your neighbor to, you can't do everybody look to your left, but, neighbor, and both of you share your thought about this. At least that's going to give some interaction. But yeah, I get it. And that's just it. I have always said about youth ministry is the most effective ministry in my 24 years has happened outside of the planned stuff. And so it's not during the program at a retreat. It's in the off time when we're having a conversation about something and about how God is working in the life of that young person. Or, it's when the kid calls me and says, hey, I can name story after story. And the kid calls me and says, hey, my dad and I are really not getting along well. Can we have a conversation? And we meet and have, ice cream or a taco or whatever and talk. So, and that's the part that's kind of missing right now is those, it really is. I've often said that it's always ironic to me. We spend so much time in youth ministry planning our meetings. I'm not saying you shouldn't plan your meetings, by the way, but we spend so much time planning the meeting portion, thinking that's going to bring about transformation, and the transformation ends up happening outside of what we planned. But yeah, I'll keep that in mind, Rebecca, or Becca, or whatever I'm supposed to call you now. I don't remember. I've known Becca way too long, by the way. It's really weird that she's now in youth ministry. It makes me feel even older than my gray hair looks. Drake, go ahead.
Is one-on-one at like a coffee shop or something like that off the table for now as well? Or is that something we could do if the parents were okay with it?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I would say that's a safe sanctuaries question first and foremost, depending on what your safe sanctuary policy says. The way I have always approached that in ministry with me is as long as I'm not if I'm in a public place, so as long as I'm not going and picking the kid up and driving them to Starbucks or to Baskin Robbins or whatever, and we're meeting there in a public place, I've always considered it to be safe sanctuary compliant. Now, if your safe sanctuary policy says differently, you've got to follow policy at your church. Beyond that, I think that's probably a thing that would be at this point easier than trying to have a gathering at a church, sitting outside at a restaurant across a table with one other person is a little easier to manage. So in my mind, and again, this is not the gospel truth. This is in my mind, that would be something that could at this point be helpful and would connect if it's possible. But there's the problem then becomes the danger. The warning I would say here is this: is if you're going to do that, you've got to come up with a plan to do that for everyone, offer it for everyone, and otherwise it becomes like you're playing favorites, and then word gets out that Drake has gone to lunch 4 times with Jimmy, and he hasn't been with Johnny at all, and then Johnny and his mom and dad are mad because Drake's playing favorites. So there has to be some kind of plan to at least have an offer to everyone. All right, Preston, go for it.
All right. So I had a thought kind of along those same lines of, the idea of group gatherings. If we were looking at sometime in July, maybe like early to mid-July, of having some kind of like a gathering for the group or whatever, what would thoughts be on, doing that somewhere in public and not at the church? So I would think somewhere like maybe if we got a small group together at Brewster's or somewhere, or Sonic maybe, and just spent 30 minutes together and maybe did a prayer and devotion or something, but just to kind of be together in a space like that would be outside.
I think that's good. Again, I would say be aware of the regulations from, as far as the number of people that can gather in a place together, but also as far as restaurants. Like we went to a restaurant this past weekend. We were in Tennessee with my wife's family, and there's 12 of us. And we went to a restaurant in Tennessee, and they're like, hey, we can only sit 6 to a table, And so we had to split our group, which is fine, but for us. But just if you're going to do that, just once check them beforehand, see what kind of precautions they're going to have you jump through and that kind of stuff. Again, this stuff is really just the planning piece has to be on overload now. And I think for youth workers, the common thought, I don't think this is necessarily true, but the common thought is youth ministry and youth workers tend to fly by the seat of their pants. I don't think that's necessarily true, but I also say that if that's something that has been you in the past, it can't be you in the future. And even if you have been not flying by the seat of your pants, it's going to have to step up again, because now we're not just thinking about planning the events, but planning safety as well. So, any last minute questions? If not, we'll wrap this thing up. We're right at an hour. I don't want to keep them too long. I do appreciate. Oh, go ahead, Drake.
Full of questions. If someone's views on a mask are strongly no, are we supposed to turn them away and say you can't be here because you don't have a mask on?
So I would say this is where the overly communicate your plan comes in. I think that what communicating your plan does, it sets expectations. So I had a conversation with some clergy folks last or weeks or so ago, and they were like, because one of the suggestions is, one of the things that's been really going back and forth is the impact of singing upon spreading coronavirus. And there was some suggestions of considering not having singing a part of worship services on June 14th when you come out together, because there was a study that said it creates like 75 times the particles, whatever, yada, yada, yada. And the pastors, co-pastors, like, if we can't sing, we're not going to have worship. And, you know, people they come to worship and they aren't singing, they're going to think this is not worship. And so what I said to them is, look, this is where communicating the expectations sets them up for what to expect. And so if they know this is the expectation that when you're going to have to wear a mask, if you communicate that well and they get there, then I think you have to say, listen, I understand. I respect your right not to wear it. I respect your right to wear it. But we have decided, for the safety of all in this location, that we're going to require people to wear masks. You know, we were sent there, and if that's something that's going to make you uncomfortable, we're going to invite you to stay home. We're going to record what we're doing, and we'll send it out. You know, you can watch it later, or you can watch it live. We'll Facebook Live it or whatever. I mean, I think, again, you've got to make that decision for in some ways, what hill you're going to die on, I guess, and what hill you're not willing to die on ultimately. But that's on you and your church decision. But that's the point of communicating clearly the expectations. That way they come knowing I'm going to be expected to put a mask on here. And if I don't want to put a mask on, maybe I shouldn't go. And again, that's okay, because people are not going to come because they're afraid of the risk. So I'm not sure that answers it. Sometimes I feel like a politician dodging the question. I'm not really trying to dodge it and put it back on you, but I am, because ultimately it's back to the church of what you guys decide to do. It's just how you handle what you do is going to be most important in the coming weeks and months and maybe even year. Anything else? Cool. Well, thank you all for being a part of this. I hope it's been helpful for you all. We will have this thing posted here in the next week or so. And thanks for watching Leadership Labs.